He woke before dawn in the Red Keep's hushed corridors. The cold winter air coiled around him like an intangible shroud. Though the castle's fires burned through the night, they only managed to take the worst bite from the chill, leaving a backdrop of persistent discomfort. Eddard Stark had grown used to such conditions in King's Landing, though the climate here was mild compared to the north. Even after so many months of winter creeping south, the capital still seemed unprepared for the simplest rigors of snow and ice. He dressed by candlelight, rubbing warmth into his hands, and steeled himself for another day of duty as Hand of the King. After finishing his ablutions, he emerged into the corridor to find 2 gold cloaks standing post. They bowed respectfully, quiet in the early hour. Ned returned a curt nod and moved onward. His mind drifted to the letters he had received the previous night, accounts from the Riverlands about the continuing presence of outlaws along the major roads, trouble that undermined the Crown's attempts to send reinforcements north to the Wall. The memory of that stinging defeat weighed on him. Lord Celtigar's nephew had been forced to retreat when ambushed by brigands or remnants of Sellsword companies who had never been properly disbanded. Now the king demanded that Edmure Tully either bring his region to heel or accept crown intervention, a threat that might spawn its own unrest. In truth, Ned understood the complexities. Though Stannis Baratheon was king, enthroned by law and by the bloody events that had sidelined Renly, the realm remained a fractious tapestry. The Tyrells grudgingly accepted Stannis's rule, but some loyalists to Renly might continue stirring dissent. The Lannisters, for their part, persistently leveraged the crown's debts to secure financial and political concessions. Dorne stood aloof, offering little more than tepid acknowledgments, as though it bided time to see whether the new regime would last. Above it all, winter's slow advance continued, a relentless reminder that shortages of food, wood, and hope could feed further discontent. Whenever Ned tried to close his eyes at night, he would see the swirl of alliances fraying like a tapestry under constant strain. He carried those images into his waking hours, determined to hold things together as best he could. He descended the curving steps leading to the main yard, where a swirl of snow coated the stones. The soft crunch beneath his boots reminded him faintly of Winterfell. It was too early for many courtiers to be roaming the Red Keep, though he saw a cluster of black-robed stewards carrying sacks of grain from a storage vault. He paused to watch them work, appreciating that these mundane tasks, moving supplies, rationing food, arranging shipments, were the bedrock on which the realm's fragile peace rested. Grand speeches and high-born negotiations might steer the realm's broad direction, but if the small folk starved, no monarchy could stand for long. A distant trumpeting from the city's gates signaled that new arrivals approached. Ned walked to the rampart overlooking the slope. By the time he reached it, the gates had begun to open for a retinue bearing the banner of House Tully, an orange and blue trout on a field of rippling color. Curiosity spurred him onward. It could be Edmure Tully responding to Stannis' stern summons, or one of the Tully bannermen come to plead for more time. Ned took the stone steps down, passing a few surprised guards, and arrived at the courtyard as the Tully party entered. Their lead rider was a slender, middle-aged man wearing a worn cloak with the Tully insignia pinned at the breast. Behind him trailed 5 mounted men in lesser finery, each with a determined expression. The leader swung down and bowed stiffly to Ned. "Lord Stark," he said, "I am Ser Walder Rivers, sworn to House Tully. I come from Riverrun with tidings for His Grace the King." Ned inclined his head. "Welcome, Ser Walder. Has Lord Edmure accompanied you?" The man shook his head. "No, my lord. Lord Edmure remains at Riverrun, overseeing efforts to disperse the outlaws. I bring letters explaining the situation and requesting a certain compromise from King Stannis. May I ask where I might speak with you or the king in private?" Ned signaled a steward to take the riders' horses, then guided Ser Walder through the courtyard and into the great hall. Though the hall was mostly empty at this hour, the hush of stone arches and fluttering banners lent it a solemn ambience. Ned gestured for Ser Walder to seat himself at a bench near the dais, where a pair of braziers glowed. The other Tully men waited at a discreet distance. A servant hurried to bring warm drinks. "You've had a long ride," Ned observed quietly. We expected some word from Lord Edmure sooner. Is the situation in the Riverlands deteriorating? Ser Walder sighed, the lines of weariness etched into his features. It is no easier, Lord Stark. The outlaws roam widely, led by unscrupulous mercenaries. They loot remote hamlets and attack caravans. Edmure has raised men to hunt them, but the outlaws vanish into forests or the hills. Worse, some pockets of small folk blame Edmure for failing to protect them, leading to local unrest. Lord Edmure begs the crown to send a combined force, enough to flush these brigands once and for all. He hopes the king will not impose a warden from King's Landing, as that might undermine Tully authority. Ned listened carefully. King Stannis wants order, but he has threatened a crown-appointed warden if Edmure cannot deliver results. The king is not a man of idle statements. If Edmure truly wants to avoid that, he must show measurable progress or prove that crown assistance will be used effectively. Time is short. Ser Walder nodded, producing a sealed letter. Lord Edmure details his plan here. He requests a modest royal force of 200 men, plus supplies to maintain them for 3 months, with Edmure matching that with his own men. They would scour the region, cornering the outlaw bands. He's certain success is possible, but only if the crown invests fully. Ned thought of the demands on the crown's purse. With the north in need, the Stormlands still unsettled, and the continuous strain of repaying Lannister debts, finding extra men or coin for the Riverlands was not trivial. But allowing chaos to persist threatened the crucial roads that caravans needed to move north. He reached for the letter. "I'll present this to King Stannis," he said. "He may require additional assurances. The realm is weary. Are these brigands truly so numerous?" Ser Walder made a resigned gesture. "Scattered groups, but altogether they cause havoc. Some likely served under Renly and never surrendered. Others are local men turned desperate by winter. Lord Edmure attempts to reason with them, offering pardon if they disband. Few accept. My lord begs your support, Lord Stark." "I understand," Ned replied. "Wait here in the keep. I'll arrange a meeting with the king. If Edmure's request is sound, perhaps we can negotiate a swift resolution." He signaled a steward to guide Ser Walder to quarters, then went in search of King Stannis. Took some time. The king was not in his solar, nor in the council chamber. At last, Ned learned that Stannis had chosen to ride out before sunrise to inspect a new watchtower site near the Blackwater, accompanied by a few knights. Ned decided to wait for his return. Meanwhile, a swirl of smaller tasks demanded attention. Finalizing ration distributions for the city's poor, approving repairs to the Red Keep's stable roofs, reviewing a complaint from a group of leatherworkers claiming unfair taxes. Though it was tedious labor, Ned knew such matters formed the daily scaffolding that held up the entire monarchy. Close to midday, Stannis returned, snow dusting the shoulders of his fur-lined cloak. Ned met him in the corridor leading to the throne room. The king looked weary, though the crisp air had reddened his cheeks. A group of half a dozen knights trailed him. One, a bearded man in Stannis's livery, carried rolled parchments, plans for the watchtowers, presumably. As they approached, Ned offered a brief bow and said, "Your Grace, I have word from Riverrun. Lord Edmure's man arrived. They propose a joint force to end the outlaws." Stannis handed his reins to a waiting groom. "A joint force, as though we have men to spare. Did Tully not vow to handle this on his own?" He strode forward, beckoning Ned to follow. The knights dispersed, leaving the two men to speak privately near the foot of the dais that led up to the Iron Throne. Torchlight shimmered across the jagged iron spines of that monstrous seat, a reminder of the kingdom's fraught history. Ned explained in more detail. The brigands' numbers, Edmure's proposal, the letter promising that with royal men, success was guaranteed within 3 months. Stannis's brow furrowed deeper with each sentence. He wants 200 men plus coin for supplies for 3 months. That is not a small request. Ned sighed. "No, Your Grace, but the roads in the Riverlands matter to us. Our men traveling north have already been attacked once. If these outlaws remain unchecked, It threatens the entire realm's cohesion. Edmure suggests that if we assist him, the area will be pacified once and for all. Stannis walked to the base of the throne's steps, eyeing the metal seat as if it were an old adversary. We might muster some men from the Crownlands, possibly from the Stormlands too, if Ser Barristan can spare them. We still have Lannister gold to consider. But every coin we spend must be justified. House Lannister is not an endless well. Ned hesitated. We could approach the Tyrells. They remain part of the realm, after all, and Mace Tyrell might see an opportunity to prove loyalty, helping quell the last remnants of chaos from Renly's failed war. If House Tyrell funds or contributes men, they might view it as a chance to win favor. Stannis gave him a sharp look. You trust Mace Tyrell to be that cooperative? Trust is the wrong word, Ned replied softly. But the Tyrells have an interest in avoiding further turmoil. The Riverlands are not far from the Reach, and continuing bandit activity could spill over. Also, they might want to show they've turned the page on backing Renly. Stannis rubbed his jaw. It's a thought. Very well. We will summon Mace Tyrell to the table. If he refuses, we'll see what can be done with crown resources. But I'll be damned if we let Renly's old supporters roam free as bandits. This must end. They concluded that Ned would write to Mace Tyrell immediately, proposing a joint force to assist Edmure, with the Tyrells providing half the men or gold needed. If that succeeded, it would spare the crown from overextending. If the Tyrells refused, they would reveal their lukewarm loyalty, pushing Stannis to muster men from the Crownlands instead. After the conversation, Ned found Ser Walder in the courtyard, informing him of the plan. The Tully man looked relieved that at least a path forward might be found. If House Tyrell cooperates, we might be done with the outlaws by spring's thaw, he said. I will await the result here, if it pleases the king. With that, Ned withdrew to pen the letter, carefully phrasing it to flatter Mace Tyrell's sense of importance without giving away too much power. He asked for a swift reply, reminding Mace that a stable Riverlands would benefit the Reach's trade routes. Once the letter was sealed and sent by Raven, Ned allowed himself a rare moment of respite, retreating to the private solar that served as a small refuge from the constant demands outside. He stood at the narrow window, gazing at the drifting snow over the city's rooftops. From here, the city looked almost peaceful, the red-tiled roofs blanketed in white. But he knew in the alleys below, people struggled with hunger, uncertain incomes, and fear of what next crisis might come. He remembered Robert's old dream, a realm free of Targaryen tyranny, a realm of laughter and feasting. That dream had died along with Robert's carefree spirit. Now they stood in the reality that was King Stannis's austere rule. Better than chaos, yes, but still a precarious balancing act. He thought of Sansa and Arya. They adapted as best they could. Sansa tried to maintain courtly manners, occasionally attending small gatherings with the daughters of lesser lords. Arya, ever restless, roamed the castle grounds, sometimes practicing with a wooden sword. Catelyn had returned to Winterfell months earlier at Ned's urging, to oversee the North in his absence, so he felt the weight of single parenthood here in King's Landing. He told himself it was best this way. The realm might not remain safe forever. At least part of his family was secure in the North, or as secure as the times allowed. A knock at the door broke his reverie. It was Peter Baelish, entering with that perpetual air of quiet amusement. "My Lord Hand," Peter said. "I trust the day finds you well? I hear from certain corners that you've reached out to Highgarden for help with the Riverlands." Quite a stroke, appealing to Mace's vanity and sense of self-importance. He might jump at the chance, or he might play coy for a while. Hard to say which. Ned kept his tone neutral. "You believe he'll refuse?" Peter shrugged, strolling over to peer out the same window. "Well, Mace Tyrell is not quick to risk his men, especially after the cost of Renly's defeat. But if he senses an advantage, perhaps a chance to ingratiate himself with the king, he could agree. He might demand something in return, such as an official recognition of Tyrell domain over certain contested lands. Best be prepared for that gambit." Ned's mouth tightened. "Yes, we'll see. If that's the price for pacifying the Riverlands, it might be worth it. But I won't cede half the realm to Highgarden. Stannis would never allow it anyway. Peter smirked. Just so. In any case, I have another matter. Our negotiations with the Braavosi for a loan remain ongoing. They worry about the realm's stability, especially rumors of Targaryen stirrings. If, by chance, Daenerys Targaryen tries to land an army, the Braavosi fear they might not recoup their coin. I've been trying to reassure them that the monarchy stands firm. Perhaps if we can show real progress in unifying the land, they'll relent on interest rates. Ned nodded, faintly exasperated. Every day brought a new entanglement. Tell them we've subjugated Renly's supporters, that the Tyrells have bent the knee, that the Lannisters remain in alliance with the crown. Let them know we intend to quell the outlaws in the Riverlands. If that doesn't demonstrate stability, what will? Peter bowed in mock deference. Very well, my Lord Hand. I shall sweeten their ears with such assurances. Let us hope it translates into a favorable contract. With that, he slipped away, leaving Ned to wonder if Littlefinger's wit might be their best advantage or a hidden danger. So many in King's Landing played the game of alliances as though it were second nature. Time drifted onward. That evening, Ned dined with King Stannis and a small circle of knights, discussing the designs for more watchtowers along the coast. Davos Seaworth reported that progress was slow but steady. Food shortages made laborers harder to hire, as many struggled to feed their families first. Stannis grumbled that no king should have to haggle over day wages, but Ned pointed out that men risked building in the cold, so their demands for more coin were not unreasonable. It was an illustration of the new monarchy's challenges. Not glorious battles or sweeping decrees, but the tedious, vital necessity of balancing a ledger while hammered by 100 smaller problems. In the following days, the keep awaited Highgarden's reply. Snow continued to dust the city. Jaime Lannister, still lingering at court under the guise of overseeing Lannister interests, spent his time sparring in the yard or trading barbs with courtiers. Stannis tolerated him grudgingly, though every conversation between them seemed to ring with unspoken tension. Kevan Lannister smoothed the rough edges, quietly ensuring that no confrontation flared beyond control. Meanwhile, the small council spent hours debating the best way to supply the Riverlands expedition if the Tyrell alliance failed. None wanted to risk a direct tax increase, lest the already burdened population revolt. As always, gold was the deciding factor. 2 weeks later, a raven arrived from Highgarden. The letter bore Mace Tyrell's seal in green wax. Ned read it aloud to Stannis in a private meeting. Mace wrote that he was deeply concerned for the realm and would consider contributing men to quell the outlaws, provided certain conditions were met. Chief among them, the crown must lift some levies on Tyrell shipments of grain, ensuring that Highgarden's exports faced minimal duties when passing through the Crownlands. Mace also suggested that a Tyrell-appointed commander help lead the expedition. In short, he wanted economic privileges and partial control in the Riverlands campaign. Stannis' face darkened as he listened. He dares demand command over Crown forces? Does he think we've forgotten who supported Renly? Ned inclined his head. He phrases it as a joint leadership, not total control. But yes, it's a power play. He wants a say in how the expedition operates, presumably so the Tyrells can claim credit when the outlaws are defeated. Stannis crushed the letter in a fist, then caught himself. We need men. If I deny him, we might have to pull men from the Stormlands or the Crownlands. Meanwhile, winter deepens. The Riverlands remain in turmoil. Ned considered carefully. We can negotiate. Perhaps we accept a partial Tyrell leadership role, no single Tyrell commander, but a shared staff with a crown-appointed lead. And for the trade levies, we might offer a reduction but not a full removal. If we appear too yielding, we lose face. But if we refuse altogether, we risk losing Tyrell support. Stannis' jaw set. Yes, fine. We'll draft a response. I'll allow them to nominate a senior knight, but the top commander will remain a royal choice. The trade levies can be cut in half, not removed entirely. That is my final offer. They hammered out the details, and Ned composed a measured letter to Mace. It politely acknowledged Highgarden's generosity while emphasizing that the crown must retain ultimate authority. The new arrangement, if accepted, would free the Tyrells from half the usual grain levies for 1 year, in exchange for their immediate contribution of 200 men, plus any supplies needed to sustain them in the field. The entire alliance hinged on Mace's willingness to compromise. Another fortnight passed, bringing more snows, more negotiations, and more news from the north. The expedition that had been delayed by bandits finally regrouped with extra guards, pressing slowly onward toward Winterfell. Another letter from the Wall revealed that Benjen Stark and the Night's Watch continued to investigate rumors of whites, though no concrete evidence had been found. Still, men swore they had seen pale shapes in the night. Ned worried that by the time they had proof, it might be too late. During this uneasy lull, a new wave of small folk trickled into King's Landing, seeking refuge from harsh winter conditions in outlying farms. Stannis ordered the City Watch to maintain order at the gates, allowing only as many as the city's limited resources could handle. Even so, the streets swelled. Riots threatened if bread ran short. Ned, seeing how precarious it was, pressed Davos and Kevin Lannister to release more funds to purchase grain from the Arbor or the Reach. The Lannisters grudgingly agreed, though Kevin insisted on interest terms. It was another moment where Ned had to swallow frustration, acknowledging that Tywin's gold was still necessary. In the midst of these mounting pressures, Highgarden's next reply finally arrived. The letter was short but affirmative. Mace Tyrell agreed to the proposed terms, so long as the joint leadership included a Tyrell knight of repute. Stannis wasted no time confirming that the royal commander would be Ser Roland Storm, recalled from the Stormlands for this new assignment. The Tyrells named Lord Bryce Caron, a bannerman once loyal to Renly but known for his martial skill, to serve as their senior figure. Caron was apparently respectable enough, if not beloved by Stannis. A day after this agreement, several Tyrell outriders arrived to begin preparations. At last, the realm might see the outlaws cornered. Ned oversaw the muster. One corner of the Red Keep's yard became a staging ground, with newly arrived Tyrell men mingling uneasily alongside the crown's soldiers. He walked among them, hearing their idle talk, sensing both relief that they might soon see action against brigands and wariness at being forced into an alliance with the crown. The Tyrell banners, green field, golden rose, added a dash of color to the snowy yard, reminiscent of the days when these same men might have marched behind Renly. How the world turned. Ser Roland Storm, a lean, dark-haired knight in his late 30s, greeted Ned with a confident salute. "Lord Hand, I stand ready. Once we finish provisioning, we'll ride for the Riverlands and meet with Edmure Tully's men. From there, we'll sweep the bandits region by region." Standing beside Roland was Lord Bryce Caron, a tall man with a stern expression. He wore the Tyrell favor pinned to his cloak, though Ned knew House Caron's sigil was a field of nightingales. War had shifted loyalties more than once. Bryce bowed stiffly. "We intend to coordinate closely, Lord Stark. The King's will, combined with Highgarden's resources, should make for a swift campaign. If Edmure Tully can do his part, we'll see these rogues broken by the New Year's midpoint." Ned nodded. "See to it. The crown depends on you. If you face difficulties, send ravens swiftly so the king can decide whether to reinforce. But let us hope it won't be necessary." A day later, the joint force departed under gray skies, heading west. Ned stood at the castle gates to watch them go. He felt a somber sense of hope that this might quell one of the last internal threats still festering since Renly's attempted rebellion. If they succeeded, roads would be safer, trade might flow more freely, and the monarchy could finally redirect focus northward. But he knew better than to celebrate prematurely. War was rarely so predictable, and winter's hardships could challenge even the best-laid plans. In the weeks that followed, King's Landing entered a deeper freeze. The harbor began to form thin sheets of ice near the quays, something rarely seen so far south. Fewer ships arrived, and the city's stockpiles shrank. Kevin Lannister juggled the crown's finances, complaining that they were hemorrhaging coin, though Tywin kept extending lines of credit, at a price. Meanwhile, Stannis grew more withdrawn, conferring often with Melisandre behind closed doors in the library tower, presumably studying old prophecies about Azor Ahai and the threat from the far north. Davos confided privately that the king believed the realm must unite more fully in the coming years, or face annihilation if ancient powers truly stirred. Ned, uncertain but deeply uneasy, pressed on with daily governance, mindful that unity was fragile at best. News from the Riverlands campaign arrived in pieces. Reports indicated early success. Ser Roland and Lord Bryce-Caron had found and destroyed 2 outlaw camps, scattering their occupants. Local villages greeted the crown's men with cautious relief, though some small folk still harbored resentment. As winter deepened, the outlaws might find it harder to hide, or so the logic went. The campaign pressed on, heading toward areas near Harrenhal rumored to be infested with bandits. Each letter from Ser Roland or Edmure Tully carried a mixture of progress and frustration. They inflicted losses on the rogues, but the outlaws adapted, splitting into smaller groups. The campaign might last longer than intended. Amid these tidings, a fresh complication arrived at the city gates in the form of a small Dornish envoy. Prince Doran Martell had finally broken his silence, sending his brother, Prince Oberyn, the Red Viper himself, to meet King Stannis. Oberyn was famed for his fiery temper and formidable skill in combat. Many remembered his grievances over the death of his sister, Elia Martell, who had perished during the sack of King's Landing under Aerys' final days. Robert's new regime had never fully mended that wound, though Ned recalled that justice had been partially addressed with Gregor Clegane. Now, with King Stannis on the throne, the Martells might sense an opportunity or a threat. The arrival of Oberyn Martell caused a stir in the Red Keep. He strode in wearing rich robes of burnt orange, a golden sunburst pinned at his shoulder, and carried himself with the confidence of a man unafraid of any challenge. He brought only a handful of Dornish retainers, but their presence drew wary looks from the gold cloaks. Ned greeted them in the throne room, where Stannis sat in grim majesty upon the Iron Throne. Melisandre stood at the base of the dais, watchful. To the side, Kevan and Jaime Lannister observed carefully, while Varys hovered in the background like a silent spider. Oberyn made a slight bow, though the tilt of his head implied it was more courtesy than submission. "Your Grace," he said, "my brother sends his regards from Sunspear. He regrets the years of distance, but believes that with a new king, Dorne might re-establish ties with the crown to mutual benefit." Stannis kept his posture rigid. "We welcome Dorne's renewed interest, but let us speak plainly. Dorne contributed little during the rebellion's aftermath. What do the Martells seek now?" Oberyn's eyes gleamed with intensity. "Dorne does not forget. We recall how my sister Elia Martell was done to death during the sack. Though that was under the Mad King's final collapse, the Lannisters had a hand in it, and your predecessor, King Robert, never truly brought them to account. Prince Doran desires a formal statement condemning that atrocity and perhaps a token of amends." Jaime Lannister tensed. He had been part of the Kingsguard at the time, though the direct blame for Elia's death fell on Gregor Clegane, Tywin's sworn man. Stannis' gaze flicked to Jaime, then back to Oberyn. "The Lannisters and I have an arrangement, but if Dorne requires a statement acknowledging the injustice, that may be done." Ned watched warily. Oberyn was known for his thirst for vengeance. If Stannis offered mere words, would that suffice? Or did Oberyn want something more tangible, like a chance to punish those responsible? Gregor Clegane was rumored to have perished from wounds, though some said he still lingered in a maimed condition, hidden away by Lannister men. The truth was murky. Meanwhile, Tywin Lannister would not sit idly if Oberyn demanded blood. Oberyn gave a cool nod. "A statement is a start. But Prince Doran also desires that Dorne have a greater voice in the realm, perhaps a seat on the small council, or some recognition of Dornish autonomy. This winter bites us as well, and we want reassurance that the crown sees us as equal partners, not just another region to be taxed." Stannis exhaled. "A seat on the small council is no small matter. I already have enough conflicting interests, Lannisters, Tyrells, and so on. Yet if Dorne would pledge men or coin or both, especially with these times, perhaps an arrangement can be made." Oberyn's lips curved faintly. We have certain resources. Dorne's climate is kinder to winter than the northern lands. We can supply food if shipping routes remain safe. Perhaps we can discuss the details over the coming days. Stannis looked to Ned. Lord Hand, see to it. Facilitate these talks. If the Martells offer real assistance, I will consider their request for representation. As for the matter of Elia Martell's murder, I'll draft a formal condemnation of that crime. The culprit was the Mountain, we all know, though the Lannister role was complicated. Jaime Lannister said nothing, though his eyes flickered with annoyance. Oberyn regarded him like a hawk eyeing prey. In that moment, Ned sensed how volatile the situation could become if left unmanaged. The memory of old bloodshed ran deep, and a single spark might light a new blaze. But for now, both sides seemed content to posture rather than fight. Following the tense court meeting, Ned ushered Oberyn to a private reception room for a more relaxed discussion. The Dornish prince sauntered in, scanning the room with an air of lazy confidence. Ned offered him spiced wine. Oberyn accepted, swirling it in his cup. After a few polite remarks about the cold, Oberyn said, "Does the king truly intend to unify the realm, or does he simply want to keep each great house at bay until winter passes?" Ned answered diplomatically, "King Stannis sees threats both external and internal. He aims to maintain stability so the realm can face greater perils. Bandits, foreign powers, even the rumored Targaryen pretender across the sea. If Dorne joins in that effort, the king will reciprocate." Oberyn studied him. "You, Lord Stark, have an air of honesty, rare in this nest of intrigues. May I speak frankly?" "Of course," Ned said. Oberyn's expression grew serious. "Dorne will not rest until we see some measure of justice for Elia and her children. If the crown's condemnation is sincere, if some reparation is made, my brother might let the matter lie. But if we sense that Lannister gold overshadows all, we will not bow quietly. Our soldiers remain formidable, even in winter." Ned understood the implication. "I acknowledge the depth of that wound. But as you know, Gregor Clegane was punished for his crimes, and the crown has distanced itself from that vile act. Tywin Lannister's exact complicity was never proven. Stannis will not permit a new civil war over old vendettas." Oberyn's mouth curved in a bitter half-smile. "Proof, yes, so ephemeral. Very well. If the king's condemnation is strong, if we see him hold to it, perhaps we can let the ghosts rest. In return, Dorne can assist with food shipments or coin for the war chest. Winter spares us more than it does the North or the Reach. We have stores of dates, olives, certain staples that keep well. My brother might release them at reduced cost." Ned nodded. "That would be welcome indeed. As for representation on the small council, I can't promise anything alone, but I'll convey your request. We could use a voice from Dorne in governance. Just know that the Tyrells and Lannisters might bristle at another seat added. The balance is delicate." Oberyn shrugged. "Let them bristle. Dorne has stood apart before, and we can stand apart again if we choose. But I sense King Stannis might prefer we stand with him, especially if he fears a Targaryen resurgence or these rumors of undead in the far north. The realm must close ranks." Ned considered how odd it felt to hear Oberyn Martell speak of unity. Times had indeed changed. He bade the prince farewell for the evening, arranging a follow-up council session the next day. As he escorted Oberyn's group out, he pondered that this Dornish alliance might be a boon, or a powder keg waiting for a spark. When Ned finally returned to his solar, he found a letter waiting from Ser Roland Storm in the Riverlands. It recounted a successful skirmish near Harrenhal. The outlaws had been driven from their hideout, though some escaped. They discovered signs that a cunning leader, an ex-Sellsword rumored to be called the Moth, organized many of these bandits. Ser Roland believed if they could capture or kill this Moth, the rest would scatter. Meanwhile, Edmure Tully's men had secured 2 major roads, though the winter made travel difficult. Lord Bryce Caron cooperated well enough, though the Tyrell Knights showed some friction with local Tully men. Still, progress was being made. Ned took a small comfort in the news. If the Riverlands campaign succeeded, one more internal danger would be quieted. Then, perhaps, the monarchy could concentrate on forging alliances with Dorne, the North, and others to prepare for any foreign or supernatural threat. He prayed it would be enough. The next morning, the small council convened with Oberyn Martell present as a guest. Stannis presided, wearing a heavy black cloak lined with fur. The usual faces, Kevan Lannister, Peter Baelish, Varys, Davos, sat around the table. Melisandre stood near the fireplace, silent but watchful. Oberyn took a seat, crossing one leg over the other, outwardly relaxed but with eyes scanning each face. Stannis announced that he would issue a formal condemnation of Elia Martell's murder, along with a statement that Gregor Clegane's acts were monstrous and not condoned by the crown. Oberyn inclined his head, evidently satisfied, though Jaime Lannister was conspicuously absent. Kevan remained stoic, perhaps relieved that the blame aimed at Gregor and not Tywin. Stannis then broached the question of Dorne's assistance, to which Oberyn declared that if the king recognized Dorne's right to speak on the council, perhaps naming Oberyn or another Dornish representative to an advisory role, Prince Doran would send caravans of supplies. The details required haggling, of course. Peter Baelish gave a wry smile. A gracious offer, Prince Oberyn. But seats on the small council are typically few. Might you accept a lesser title at first, say, Special Envoy of Dorne, to see how these talks progress? After all, we have not dealt with this scale of supply agreement before. Oberyn's eyes narrowed in amusement. A half measure, Lord Baelish, though I see your reasoning. Very well, I can be patient. My brother wants results, not merely titles. Provide the condemnation, show sincerity, and we'll open caravans. If in due course we find ourselves truly valued, we might discuss a full seat. Stannis nodded. That is acceptable for now. Write to your brother that the decree condemning Elia's murder will be announced at the Great September before the assembled lords. The realm shall hear it plainly. In return, Prince Doran sends proof of his willingness. The first wave of caravans from Dorne carrying grain, dates, salted fish, or whatever can endure the journey in winter. We will keep a tally of the cost. Oberyn waved a hand. We can manage. Dorne does not do charity, but neither do we aim to profiteer. We prefer to show that we stand with the crown, so long as the crown respects us. Stannis concluded with a grunt of acceptance. With that, the main outlines of an alliance were forged. Varys seemed pleased, murmuring about how more supplies in King's Landing could alleviate hunger. Kevan Lannister remained cautious, aware that an alliance with Dorne might shift the power balance away from the Westerlands. Ned felt relief that a potential front of conflict was instead becoming an avenue of cooperation. Yet, as always, he braced himself for the next hidden snag. Over the next few days, the vow of condemnation was written in formal language. It named Gregor Clegane as a criminal whose deeds had already been punished by royal justice, and it censured the cruelty inflicted on Elia Martell and her children. It did not name Tywin Lannister, though it denounced those who had facilitated such atrocities under the Mad King's collapse. Oberyn read it carefully, pronouncing it acceptable as a step forward. Word spread throughout the keep that the announcement would occur in the Great September of Baelor at the start of the following week. People buzzed with curiosity, for the crown rarely issued retroactive condemnations in such a public manner. On the appointed day, a cold wind swept the city. Ned accompanied Stannis by carriage to the Great September, the streets lined with onlookers. Some among the small folk, wrapped in ragged cloaks, stared in confusion, uncertain what this ceremony entailed. In the Sept's courtyard, knights formed a ring of steel around the entrances, ensuring order. Oberyn Martell arrived with his retinue, wearing a cloak of deep orange that stood out amid the winter gloom. Kevan Lannister appeared as well, though Jaime was nowhere to be seen, likely to avoid the spectacle. Inside, the Sept's vast interior echoed with hushed voices. Rows of pews filled with courtiers, lords, and ladies who had braved the cold. Torches burned in sconces, the glow reflecting off marble pillars. At the front, near the altar, stood Stannis in a dark fur-trimmed coat, Ned by his side, and a Septon who would read the crown's proclamation. Melisandre watched from behind one of the pillars, looking vaguely bored by the trappings of the faith of the Seven. When the septon rang a small bell to signal attention, the gathered people quieted. In a solemn voice, the septon began to read, "Hear now the words of His Grace, Stannis of the House Baratheon, King of the Undulls and the First Men, Protector of the Realm, concerning crimes committed in the final days of the Mad King's reign." The hush deepened. "It is hereby declared that Elia Martell and her children were foully murdered, a deed abhorrent to the laws of gods and men. The Crown condemns this atrocity without reservation. Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, was judged responsible and paid for his crimes. Any who abetted such acts stand forever stained by dishonor. The Martell bloodline shall not be forgotten. The Crown acknowledges the sorrow inflicted upon Dorne and extends remorse for the realm's failure to protect the innocent." A ripple passed through the crowd. Some looked uneasy, some whispered to neighbors. Kevin's face was set in stone, though he must have known the subtext regarding Lannister involvement. Oberyn Martell stood with his arms folded, head high. In that moment, Ned felt the weight of old blood debts pressing down. Perhaps these few words would not erase the pain, but they might help the realm move forward. When the septon finished, Stannis stepped forward. He said few words, mostly affirming the condemnation and stating that in the new era, such crimes would never be sanctioned. Then he bowed briefly to Oberyn, who inclined his head in return. The assembled crowd witnessed a moment of uneasy respect between king and Dornish prince. Then, with the ceremony concluded, people began to filter out of the sept, brimming with gossip. Ned escorted Stannis back to the carriage, noticing how Oberyn lingered to chat with a few lords. It was done, an official condemnation, a symbolic gesture. In the days to come, Dorne would begin sending supplies, forging a new link in the chain that Ned hoped would hold the realm together. That evening, a subdued feast took place in the Red Keep to honor the new Dornish crown understanding. Wine flowed, though not in great abundance. The cold outside made the hall drafty, so braziers dotted the periphery. Musicians played softly, their tunes overshadowed by the hum of conversation. Oberyn circulated among the tables, sometimes sharing barbed repartee with Lannister knights, sometimes laughing with lesser lords who admired his frankness. Stannis presided from the dais, face grim but not entirely closed off. Ned drifted among the guests, ensuring no trouble brewed. He spotted Sansa at a table with other young ladies, each wearing thick shawls to ward off the chill. Arya was absent. Probably she had sneaked away to avoid the formalities. Ned would speak to her later. He paused to exchange words with Davos, who quietly approved of the alliance, seeing it as a chance to keep the city fed. Peter Baelish lounged near one corner, making cryptic remarks about how the swirl of alliances might shift next. Varys glided by, smiling, offering no direct predictions, but quietly congratulating Ned on the success of the day. Then came a small commotion near the dais. Oberyn stood face to face with a Lannister guard, who seemed agitated. Ned hurried over, worried that old resentments might erupt into violence. Kevin Lannister also stepped forward, ready to intervene. As Ned arrived, he heard Oberyn's cool voice, "Calm yourself. I only asked if you served in the sack. If not, then you need not be so defensive." The guard bristled. "Some things are better left in the past, Prince. We serve the realm now." Kevin placed a hand on the guard's shoulder. "Enough." To Oberyn, he said, "I apologize if my man gave offense. We appreciate the new unity. Let us not dwell on shadows." Oberyn's expression was unreadable. Then he shrugged. "As you say, my lord, peace is new to me, but I can learn to embrace it, if others do the same." Ned exhaled in relief as the tension abated. The guard withdrew, chastened by Kevin's stern look. The feast continued, though the mood felt tenuous. By the end of the evening, Oberyn departed with a small retinue, claiming he needed fresh air. Stannis slipped away soon after, leaving Ned to ensure the final guests dispersed without incident. In the following weeks, Dornish supply caravans did indeed begin to arrive, carrying crates of preserved fruits, salted fish, wines, and other goods to bolster the city's stores. The watch at the city gates reported that the caravans traveled safely, escorted by Dornish spears. This development eased the threat of starvation in King's Landing, giving Ned a measure of relief. Meanwhile, a fresh dispatch from the Riverlands indicated Ser Roland Storm had nearly cornered the outlaw leader called the Moth. Hopes rose that the campaign might soon end. With those successes, the monarchy's hold grew steadier. Even the Tyrell men still in the capital seemed satisfied that their part of the bargain had been honored. Amid these cautious gains, a single raven arrived from across the narrow sea, delivered by a Pentoshi merchant ship. Varys brought the letter to Ned in the council chamber. It was from Illyrio Mopatis, the Pentoshi magister rumored to support the Targaryen exiles. The letter was addressed to His Grace, the King in Westeros, but the text suggested that Daenerys Targaryen might not be as helpless as some believed. Illyrio wrote, with feigned politeness, that the realm should reconsider its hostility toward the last Targaryen, who had shown resilience and might soon command alliances in the east. He implied that war could be avoided if a suitable arrangement were reached. It was a veiled threat, or so Ned interpreted it. When Stannis read the letter, his expression darkened. He wants us to parley with a would-be usurper? Never. If Daenerys Targaryen sets foot on these shores, I will do as Robert should have done, crush her claim. I have no interest in making deals with Targaryens. Ned remained quiet for a moment, remembering how Robert once wanted the Targaryen children killed outright. Stannis was less mercurial, but no less firm. Your Grace, Ned ventured. We have no reason to trust Illyrio's words. Likely it's a bluff. Still, we should remain alert. If the Targaryens gather a fleet, they could attempt a landing during winter, though it would be foolish. Stannis ground his teeth. Foolish or not, we cannot ignore it. Let the watchers on the narrow sea remain vigilant. I will not dispatch assassins, if that concerns you, but I'll not show mercy to Targaryen ambitions. That settled that. Varys said he would monitor developments in Essos. Peter Baelish suggested the crown fortify a few key ports, just in case. But the matter of Daenerys seemed distant compared to the immediate winter hardships. Ned turned his attention back to the forging of alliances, the distribution of supplies, and the ongoing Riverlands conflict. The crown's ability to survive hinged on solving those more pressing challenges first. Day by day, winter's severity deepened further. Snow piled against city walls, and the Blackwater Bay froze in patches, an odd sight for the capital. Some nights, the wind howled so fiercely that shutters rattled and men cursed. Ned often found his mind drifting to the north, where conditions would be far harsher. He received word that Catelyn had secured Winterfell stores, ensuring enough food for their people. Robb was growing into a reliable young leader. Bran and Rickon thrived under Maester Luwin's guidance. The letters provided him comfort, reminding him that all his sacrifices in the capital might one day yield a stable realm for his children. The final blow against the outlaws came in midwinter, when a triumphant raven arrived from Ser Roland Storm. They had captured the Moth after a fierce skirmish near the ruins of a small keep. The Moth turned out to be a seasoned mercenary from the Free Cities who had drifted to Renly's cause, then gone rogue after the defeat. With him in chains, most of the scattered bandits lost cohesion, and the roads were declared safe again. Edmure Tully expressed profound gratitude, vowing to maintain patrols so the outlaws would not reemerge. A sense of relief pervaded King's Landing at the news, for one more internal threat had been quelled, thanks in part to the Tyrell alliance. Stannis ordered a modest ceremony to welcome Ser Roland and Lord Bryce Cairn back, though the roads were so snowy it took them weeks to return. In that interval, Mace Tyrell wrote, congratulating everyone involved and subtly reminding the crown of the promised trade concessions. Ned authorized the lowered levies for a year, and though it galled Stannis to reduce crown revenues, it was the price of success. The monarchy gained stability in the Riverlands and along key routes, which helped both commerce and unity. It was perhaps worth the cost. When Ser Roland and Bryce finally arrived, they were greeted in the Red Keep's yard by a small crowd of knights, cheering their victory over the brigands. The men looked travel-worn but proud. Roland gave a crisp salute to Ned. Lord Hand, we are pleased to report mission accomplished. Lord Bryce here proved a fine companion in the field, and Edmure Tully's men fought bravely. Bryce Caron nodded. Aye, though the winter was the real enemy. We lost some to frostbite, unfortunately, but now the Riverlands roads are free of major threats. Let any new bandits try. They'll find no mercy from House Tully or the Crown. Ned thanked them, then escorted them to meet King Stannis in the throne room. Stannis expressed terse congratulations, awarding each commander a token purse of gold. Bryce Caron accepted gracefully, saying he would share it with his men. Roland offered a few words praising the Tyrell contingent, which Stannis acknowledged with a nod. As the audience concluded, Ned felt the weight of one more thorn removed from the realm's side. If all such efforts proceeded so well, they might emerge from winter intact. With the Riverlands settled, the city better provisioned by Dornish caravans, and the Tyrell arrangement holding, the monarchy stood on firmer ground than it had in months. Still, tensions simmered. The Lannisters privately resented how Dorne gained influence at court. Jaime Lannister watched Oberyn with narrowed eyes whenever they crossed paths. Tywin remained at Casterly Rock, likely planning how to secure more concessions once the Braavosi loan was finalized. Meanwhile, whispers of unrest in the Vale, of Greyjoy ships stirring in the west, and the possibility of a Targaryen crossing all hovered in the background. And overshadowing every other concern were the puzzling, half-confirmed tales of the White Walkers in the far north, which might eventually dwarf every mortal quarrel. Ned carried on day after day. He mediated disputes among lesser lords, organized supply routes, and drafted letters to the Night's Watch. He gently pressed Stannis to finalize a plan for reinforcing the wall once the roads improved, though the king insisted they wait until early spring to mount a major expedition. "We'll make the trip ourselves if need be," Stannis said, "but not until we're certain the realm won't collapse in our absence." Each time, Ned suppressed a flicker of anxiety. The next few months might prove critical. One dawn, as Ned paced along the outer battlements, he paused to watch the horizon. The city below slumbered in the snowy haze, chimneys exhaling thin trails of smoke. In that quiet moment, he reflected on how far they had come since Robert's fatal boar hunt. The Lannisters sidelined only to become uneasy partners. Renly's rebellion quelled and replaced by a grudging truce with the Tyrells. Dorne drawn closer through a condemnation of old crimes. The Riverlands pacified. He had done as Robert asked, preserving the realm from self-destruction. Yet an even graver threat might lurk beyond the frost-laden forests of the far north. He recalled the letter from Benjen describing footprints that glowed under moonlight, the missing men, and the half-panicked accounts of living corpses. Such stories might be mere superstition, but Ned sensed too many coincidences. Something out there defied the normal logic of warfare. If it came south, how would all these lords and alliances respond? Would the Game of Thrones matter when the dead walked? He let the winter wind buffet him, inhaling the taste of ice and salt from Blackwater Bay. Then he descended the steps, resolved that if a storm came from the north, he must see the realm united as never before. That was the final promise to keep. He whispered softly, "I will hold them together, Robert, for as long as I can." That day, he spoke again to King Stannis, urging that the moment the roads cleared even slightly, they begin moving men north. Stannis agreed in principle but insisted they could not depart if the city risked famine or revolt. Ned countered that with Dorne's supplies, the city might hold. Perhaps Davos could handle matters in Stannis' stead. A compromise formed. If the winter's worst storms relented, Stannis and Ned would travel to Winterfell with a retinue to see firsthand the wall's condition. They would do so around the time fresh growth might appear in the warmer southern areas, ensuring at least partial stability. "Men respect a king who sees the front lines," Stannis said, as though steeling himself for a bitter duty. Thus, the realm moved inch by inch toward a new phase. On some days, Ned felt a cautious optimism. The internal wars quieted, the alliances strengthened, resources trickling in from Dorne, the Tyrells abiding by their pledges. The monarchy, though hardly beloved, had secured order. On other days, dread gnawed at him. The Targaryen exiles still hovered in Essos, possibly forging alliances. Balon Greyjoy was rumored to be building longships. The Vale's regent, Lisa Arryn, had declined repeated invitations to court, and that nameless horror rumored beyond the wall still flickered at the edges of their comprehension. Yet for all the weight of these concerns, the kingdom stood in a better position than it had been at any point since Robert's boar hunt. The capital was not starving, the Riverlands roads were relatively safe, the Stormlands had quieted under Barristan's watch, and the North endured. Night after night, Ned would fall asleep weary but thankful that no new civil war had erupted. The memory of Renly's attempt, once so dangerous, now felt like a half-remembered dream. Even Renly himself faded into obscurity. From the Reach, vague whispers surfaced about him living in gentle retirement. His wounds never fully healed, physically or spiritually. When the final snows of deep winter battered King's Landing, the monarchy hunkered down, trusting the alliances Ned had nurtured. Oberyn Martell remained in the city for a time, ensuring that Dorne's supply lines ran smoothly. He sparred in the yard occasionally with Jaime Lannister, drawing fascinated crowds. Their duels were tense but never reached lethal aggression, each warrior too proud to yield, but also mindful that murder in the yard would shatter the fragile peace. Kevan Lannister quietly managed the crown's purse, while Peter Baelish pursued the Braavosi deal. Melisandre continued to advise Stannis on mystical portents, though the king kept his worship discreet, not wishing to alienate the faith of the Seven. And Ned moved among them, the quiet wolf, ensuring no single spark lit a new conflagration. As the darkest nights of midwinter passed, a faint sense of turning emerged in the city. Hints of less frigid mornings, the prospect that the roads might eventually clear. By the calendar, spring was still distant, but a subtle shift in the wind suggested that the worst might recede, at least for a span. That sense of possibility wove through the Red Keep. Lords who had once feuded now engaged in pragmatic conversations about trade, gleaning that with fewer bandits and more food, they might profit. Dorne's caravans turned a tidy sum. The Tyrells resumed shipping grain at preferential levies. The Lannisters observed, cautious but taking their own share of benefits. Ned felt hope flicker. If the realm endured this winter largely intact, perhaps the next stage would bring genuine unity. He prayed that was so, for if the rumors of ancient evils in the far north were true, men would need every scrap of cooperation to survive. He penned more letters to Winterfell, instructing them to gather extra men. He wrote to the Night's Watch, encouraging them to stay vigilant. He and Stannis began discreetly planning the journey north. If all went well, they would leave King's Landing as soon as the roads permitted, leaving behind a caretaker council led by Davos and Kevan Lannister, ensuring day-to-day order. Yet nothing was guaranteed. So many forces might still arise to tear it all down. Ned carried that knowledge like a quiet burden. But for once, the realm breathed a collective sigh of relief. The outlaws were crushed, Dorne and the Crown were forging a beneficial arrangement, the Tyrell alliance held, and the Lannisters were momentarily placated with financial deals. The greatest threats, Greyjoy restlessness, Targaryen pretensions, remained distant. In that relative calm, Ned allowed himself brief moments of contentment, especially when he saw the flicker of a smile on Sansa's face or heard Arya's laughter as she dashed through the corridors. Their father had kept the promise he made to Robert, at least up to now. He awoke one morning, near the tail end of deep winter, to an astonishing sight. The sun shone brightly over the castle yard, melting the top layer of snow into a sparkling crust of slush. A hush enveloped the Red Keep, as though uncertain how to respond to clear skies. Ned took it as a small omen. He dressed quickly and ventured outside. The yard bustled, with stable hands guiding horses carefully so they wouldn't slip, knights exchanging greetings about the welcome change in weather. The gold cloaks at the gate looked almost cheerful. Ned realized that this might be the earliest sign that the season's absolute harshest days were behind them. Perhaps soon travel would be easier. He could plan with Stannis to visit Winterfell, to see the Wall, to confront the murk of half-believed threats. Yet even as hope burgeoned, Ned maintained caution. Years of war and intrigue had taught him that nothing remained stable for long in Westeros. Still, He offered a silent prayer to the old gods that if conflict came, the alliances he'd painstakingly woven would hold. He pictured a day when the Crown, the Tyrells, the Martells, the Lannisters, and the North all stood together against any foe, human or otherwise. If that day ever arrived, it would vindicate every sleepless night he spent as protector of the realm after Robert's death. He remembered that day in the throne room, Robert's last words naming him protector, shutting out the Lannisters from the highest seat of power. How it had roiled the houses, shaped every alliance, forced him to juggle competing demands. Now, many moons later, Stannis reigned with Ned at his side, forging a different future than might have been if Cersei or Renly had gained the throne. Was it a better future? Perhaps. It was at least one less riddled by the short-sighted lust for power that had undone so many. Stannis might be stern, but he respected law and order more than personal indulgence. That, combined with Ned's sense of measured fairness, had guided the realm through each crisis so far. A crisp voice at his shoulder startled him from his reverie. It was Davos Seaworth. "My Lord Hand," Davos said. "The king wishes to see you in his solar. Something about finalizing the time frame for traveling north." Ned nodded, heartbeat quickening. "Then let us go." They walked side by side, crossing the yard where droplets fell from the eaves with each passing moment of sunshine. Inside, the corridors retained the chill, but Ned felt an unexpected surge of optimism. If Stannis was ready to name a firm date for their departure, it meant the king believed the capital could manage without him, at least for a while. That, in turn, suggested that the alliances Ned had stitched together were solid enough to hold in his absence. When they reached the king's solar, they found Stannis seated at a table piled with maps, with Melisandre standing off to one side, her red robes bright even in the subdued light. The king gestured for Ned and Davos to approach. "Close the door," he said, voice low. They complied, shutting out the echoing corridor. Stannis tapped the map spread before him, a map of Westeros with detailed markings from King's Landing to the north. "I've spoken with Kevan Lannister and Davos about how to keep the city governed while we're gone," Stannis said. "Davos is prepared to assume a caretaker role, aided by Kevan in financial matters, and with Peter Baelish ensuring the daily coin flow. The City Watch remains loyal, and Oberyn Martell will remain as envoy, which means Dorne has a representative ensuring their caravans continue. The Tyrells, for now, are content with their lowered levies." Ned scanned the map, noting a route that cut through the Riverlands, then the Neck, then on to Winterfell. "It will still be a hard journey, Your Grace, but at least the bandits are gone." Stannis nodded. "We'll take a proper escort, perhaps 100 men. That should suffice. I want the realm to see the king traveling for unity, not launching a new war. Once we reach Winterfell, we'll confirm your regency there, gather a few northern lords, and then proceed to the Wall. If these rumored threats are real, I must witness it myself." Davos shifted his weight. "Your Grace, do we have a fallback plan if something goes awry in the capital? If another old grudge surfaces, or a Targaryen agent arrives?" Stannis frowned. "You'll handle it, Davos. You have the king's authority. Kevan Lannister will be your check so the crown remains stable. I trust you to do your duty. The realm can't remain paralyzed by fear of every rumor. The White Walkers, if they exist, are the greater peril." Ned exhaled softly. They were committing to this path, then. "When do we depart?" Stannis traced a line on the map. "If the weather holds, we leave in 2 weeks. That should give time to finalize the caretaker arrangements. We'll travel slowly, to keep the men and horses safe on icy roads. If all goes well, we might reach Winterfell by the season's turning, then move on to the Wall. I want to see your brother Benjen and the Night's Watch leadership. I want the truth." Melisandre spoke then, her voice resonant. "The truth awaits, Your Grace. If the darkness stirs, only the light can drive it back. This journey is a step toward destiny." Stannis's lips tightened slightly, but he did not refute her. Ned, for his part, merely gave a polite nod. He respected the priestess's sincerity, if not her dogma. For now, they had more tangible concerns: travel logistics, caretaker governance. the possibility that the Lannisters might exploit their absence. Yet the king seemed resolute, and Ned would follow that lead. Honor and duty demanded no less. They spent the next hours ironing out details. Davos would hold a regent's seal, enabling him to act in Stannis's name. Kevin would manage the treasury. Peter Baelish would maintain the tenuous Braavosi negotiations. Oberyn Martell, with 1 or 2 Dornish advisors, would keep an eye on major decisions that might affect Dorne. A small council would meet regularly, hopefully ensuring no house felt slighted. Meanwhile, Jaime Lannister, if he chose to remain, would simply be another knight in the Kingsguard, his presence overshadowed by Barristan Selmy's authority. Ned saw potential friction, but no immediate threat. The realm, for all its fractures, was more stable now than at any time since Robert's death. He prayed it would hold. As the days ticked down, Sansa learned of their plan to journey north and lit up with excitement. Arya was equally eager, though she feigned casual indifference, talking more about wanting to see Winterfell's courtyard again to test her climbing skills. Ned assured them both that it might be a difficult trip, with uncertain roads and the final throes of winter. But they were determined. The king had not forbidden Ned from bringing his daughters, and in fact, Stannis indicated no objection. Possibly he saw it as a sign of trust. Ned took comfort in the idea that his girls might see their home once more, concluding this long chapter of tension in King's Landing. Finally, the appointed day arrived. The sun rose behind scattered clouds, the temperature still cold but not as biting. The city bustled with watchers at the gates. Word had spread that the king was departing for the north. Some small folk lined the streets, curious or hopeful. Ned oversaw the final arrangements, ensuring wagons carried enough supplies for a protracted journey. Soldiers in Baratheon black and gold stood ready, along with a sprinkling of northern men Ned had summoned from White Harbor. Sansa and Arya waited in a carriage, well bundled in furs. Melisandre was not coming. She chose to remain near the library tower, muttering that her place was to watch the city's heart. Stannis had not pressed the matter. Davos approached, exchanging a solemn handshake with Ned. "Gods be with you on the road, Lord Hand," he said quietly. "I'll do my best to keep the city as you've left it, or better." Ned offered a thin smile. "You've my full confidence, Ser Davos." "Thank you, and watch for any sign of new tensions. If the Targaryens do move, ensure the city watch stands firm. May the realm remain at peace until we return." Stannis mounted his horse near the front, wearing black mail under a heavy cloak. He signaled for Ned to join him. Once Ned was astride, he steered his mount beside the king. Around them, knights formed ranks. The city watch parted to let them proceed through the gate. As they moved onto the main street, the populace bowed or gawked. Some cheered half-heartedly, others simply looked anxious. It was not the roar that might accompany a beloved king, but it was not outright hostility either. They proceeded at a measured pace, crossing the city's narrow roads until they reached the outer gates. There, the morning light illuminated the open road ahead, blanketed in patches of snow and ice, but passable. Stannis halted briefly, turning to speak in a low voice that only Ned heard. "We ride to secure the realm's future," the king said. "If the old tales prove false, so be it. But if they are true, the realm must be ready." Ned nodded, sensing the gravity. "Yes, your grace. We will do what must be done. Let us hope we find enough unity in time." With that, King Stannis spurred his horse forward. Ned followed, and the caravan rumbled out from the shadow of King's Landing into the open countryside. The faint echoes of the city's bustle receded behind them, replaced by the crisp hush of snow-laden fields. An entire realm stretched before them, winding roads leading north, toward Winterfell, the Wall, and whatever truths might lie beyond. Ned inhaled the cold air, feeling a tremor of expectation and trepidation. He would face what came with unwavering resolve, carrying the realm's fragile peace in his heart as he journeyed home at last, fulfilling the promise he had made to a dying king to hold Westeros together for as long as honor and determination could manage.